Craft matters. In small ways, like how a coffee is brewed. And in not so small ways, like how your money is cared for. Which is why for 160 years, UBS has elevated banking to a craft. Tailoring unique strategies that combine human expertise with the latest technologies. All happening across 24 time zones and 12 key financial hubs. With you at the heart of it all. UBS. Advice is our craft.
You're listening to The Globalist, first broadcast on the 27th of October 2025 on Monocle Radio. The Globalist, in association with UBS. Live from London, this is The Globalist with me, Emma Nelson. A very warm welcome to today's programme. Coming up, we're at the Asean Summit in Kuala Lumpur. The aim of the gathering is to build economic integration. Easier said than done when tariff wars with the US have been dominating the agenda. We'll hear more about that, and ASEAN admits its newest member.
Timor-Leste will now have a seat at the table, not just in ASEAN, but at international meetings like the East Asia Summit and other security dialogues with major global powers.
More on that in a moment. Plus, why has Pope Leo chosen Lebanon and Turkey for his first international trip? We'll hear the latest on the midterm elections in Argentina, and
we have been the biggest book event in general in the Nordics. We get some 100,000 people attending every year. And I think from that maybe comes the special flair that Helsinki Book Fair has.
Off to the Helsinki Book Fair we will go. That's all coming up on The Globalist, live from London. First, a quick look at what else is happening in today's news. Another US warship has sailed into waters close to the Venezuelan coast, with Washington claiming it's engaged in a war against drug traffickers. 2 people are being questioned in connection with the theft of France's crown jewels from the Louvre Museum in Paris last weekend. And the airspace above Vilnius Airport has been closed for a 4th time in a week after helium balloons were spotted carrying what's believed to be contraband cigarettes from Belarus. Stay tuned to Monocle Radio throughout the day for more on these stories, but first, this year's summit of ASEAN has been described as arguably the most important regional gathering in years. The list of attendees testified to this. There was the US President Donald Trump, China's Premier Li Qiang, plus Japan's new Prime Minister and the Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney. Bitter trade wars with the US have been dogging the leaders in the summit's agendas, but the meeting is also eventful for another reason. The ASEAN bloc has welcomed Timor-Leste as its 11th member, marking its first expansion since 1999. Well, to guide us through an exceptionally busy couple of days, I'm joined from the Malaysian capital by Adam Hancock, the journalist. A very good afternoon to you, Adam.
Hello, good afternoon.
So this has been, Donald Trump has now gone, hasn't he? But the whole presence of Donald Trump made the fact that the agenda was always going to be dominated by trade wars.
Absolutely, yes. It was really quite something yesterday when President Trump was here. As you said, he was only here for a day. He's now on the way to Japan, but it was quite a frantic day yesterday. He arrived, he oversaw the Cambodia and Thailand peace agreement, which was signed on the sidelines of the summit. And he also signed a number of trade deals with Southeast Asian nations, including deals around critical minerals with both Malaysia and Thailand. And continuing that trade theme were 2 other major events yesterday. Firstly, President Trump sat down with the Brazilian president on the sidelines. Now, Brazil are trying to get their tariff rate lowered. They're currently at 50% because Trump is not happy about the treatment of the former Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro. They had a pretty constructive talk, and it sounds like they're going to get to work right away on getting that tariff level lowered. But also on the sidelines of this meeting, there were discussions between US and Chinese trade officials. They wrapped up their talks yesterday, and there were some positive noises coming out of those meetings, particularly from the US side and the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, who said that they now have a framework deal in place, which President Trump and President Xi will be able to discuss when they meet later in the week in South Korea. And everyone's going to be watching that meeting very closely because they're hoping for a trade deal between the US and China before Trump's threatened 100% tariffs on China kick in on November the 1st. So it's been trade heavy. Whenever Trump's there, it does seem to be the case. But he certainly had a lot of time for Southeast Asian leaders yesterday, quite a lot of meetings. And yeah, it was a whirlwind of diplomacy here.
And has that left the ASEAN atmosphere buoyant, or are people still reeling from the different approach that Donald Trump takes with every single country he encounters?
I think it's a little bit of both, in all honesty. I think there's probably some whiplash in some respects because economies in this region, they were battered by those Liberation Day tariffs. Big export markets to the US were hit hard. Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos, Malaysia, Indonesia, amongst them. And then the US have been doing deals. There's various tariff levels now with different countries in the region. But President Trump still decided to come to the ASEAN meeting. He hasn't been to one since 2017. He skipped an ASEAN summit when it was held virtually during the pandemic. So it almost makes it quite strange. On the one hand, he's showing little engagement with this region except to slap tariffs on ASEAN member states. But he has also turned up at this summit. Yes, he obviously had the temptation of coming and being part of the Thailand-Cambodia deal, and he is going to be in the region anyway. But still, he made the effort to come here and meet with the Malaysian Prime Minister, meet with ASEAN leaders. So I think there's some reassurance. He said that the US is 100% with the region. But do bear in mind that even those trade deals that were signed yesterday with the likes of Thailand, Cambodia and Malaysia, they weren't lowering tariffs as such. They're setting frameworks for opening their economies up to each other and some pathways to lower tariffs. But it wasn't like he was just handing out treats here during his one-day stop.
And as a result, were the ASEAN leaders aware that after the effect that Donald Trump has had on each individual country in the bloc as a whole, there is perhaps this impetus now that they need to work and pull together more strongly, because there's this perennial focus, isn't there, when it comes to ASEAN? It's economic integration. How strong a force was that in Malaysia yesterday?
Yeah, very much so. And it's kind of continuing today, and maybe more so today because President Trump has now left. There's an economic summit happening this afternoon, which includes all of the ASEAN member states plus 5 regional partners, and that is backed by Beijing. And it's quite a powerful set of countries all up when you tally together all of their GDP. And that's seen as something that could act as a buffer against tariffs from the United States. I think it's still an age-old problem for countries in this region. They are caught in the middle of that ongoing tussle between the US and China. They need both of them. They need them for defense, they need them for strategic partnerships, and they need them for economic reasons as well. And China has tried to fill some of the void left by Washington's tariff regime in recent times, but still there is a willingness from ASEAN nations to engage with President Trump and Washington. But I think the global trade situation has certainly focused minds within ASEAN. They've realized the importance of that economic integration that they talk about. And they're also assessing other countries that they can do deals with, other frameworks that they can put in place. Countries, I'm based in Singapore, and they're constantly looking for new trade agreements and trade partnerships. So although the US still dominates, I think now there is a clear focus. They understand Trump's position, and they're having to look elsewhere to get those reassurances. And
also, this is moving away from trade. Donald Trump was there for the signing of the Thailand. It was a ceasefire agreement, wasn't it, between Thailand and Cambodia in Kuala Lumpur. How much did that shape the weekend?
Yeah, that was kind of very much the headline occasion, really. Everyone sort of knew that was the main reason that President Trump was here. He made a very big deal out of signing the Declaration of Peace. It's a tricky one, really, in terms of what to call the deal. President Trump called it the Kuala Lumpur Peace Accords. The Thai officials were a little bit more cautious on that front. They described it as a pathway to peace because although it is effectively a bit of a peace deal, it's a series of steps that both sides can take to ensure that the conflict doesn't resume again. Remember, this is a decades-old conflict. It isn't something that just happened in July, these border skirmishes. It's been going on for a long time. So it's not like Trump has solved the overall issue, but instead he did bring them to the negotiating table, threatening to withdraw trade deals. He did get them to sit down. Malaysia also played a big role. They hosted those initial talks. And they have now agreed upon a series of measures, including removing artillery from the borders. Thailand saying that if all of these measures are met, they will release some Cambodian prisoners of war as well. So I don't know if it's going to hold that ceasefire deal. It's a long-running conflict. It's not like this is completely the end, but certainly it's a positive step forward. But President Trump was determined to have his day in the sun when it comes to that. He called it momentous, historic. He talked about how going around the world solving conflicts was a hobby. He said he shouldn't call it a hobby, but it almost is for him. It's something he loves to do. So it was the headline occasion yesterday, and Trump certainly got the photo opportunity that he wanted.
Adam, stay with us for a moment because we want to hear about some of the other news of the ASEAN summit. Asia's youngest nation, Timor-Leste or Timor-Leste, depending which pronunciation you choose, or even East Timor, has just become the latest member of the bloc. It was admitted this weekend at ASEAN. Monocle's Naomi Shu Elegant has the story. Did you get...
At long last, Timor-Leste has been admitted to ASEAN. Asia's youngest country and one of its poorest is now the 11th member of the regional grouping, which counts Indonesia, Thailand, Singapore, and this year's chair Malaysia among its number. It is a monumental occasion for the former Portuguese colony. Timor-Leste won a long and bloody battle for independence from Indonesia in 2002, and being accepted by ASEAN has been an arduous journey. It's been 14 years since it formally applied for membership, and 49 years since the young José Ramos Horta first floated the possibility of his country joining the bloc. Ramos Horta is now 75 years old, a Nobel Peace Prize winner and serving for the second time as Timor-Leste's president. When we spoke earlier this week, he was sanguine, preparing to lead the delegation from Dili to Kuala Lumpur and preside over his country's official welcome into ASEAN, a meaningful political win and a symbolic and long overdue recognition of Timor-Leste's place in Southeast Asia. Timor-Leste will now have a seat at the table, not just in ASEAN, but at international meetings like the East Asia Summit and other security dialogues with major global powers. Membership will also provide access to preferential trade agreements and open the door to more investment, tourism, and educational opportunities. But many of those opportunities will take time and effort to develop. Timor-Leste will be the poorest member of ASEAN by a significant margin. It makes up just 0.1% of regional GDP, and its economy relies heavily on fast-depleting oil reserves. Unemployment and child malnutrition are serious issues, and its fiscal capacity still lags its Southeast Asian neighbors. But Timor's membership also offers opportunities to ASEAN. It far outranks the rest of the member states on global indexes of press freedom and political and civil liberties, and its constitution explicitly outlaws the death penalty. The nation is a vocal proponent of liberal democracy, joining a group whose members include repressive one-party states, an absolute monarchy, and a military junta. Ramos Horta is deadly serious about the work ASEAN membership will require and the level of reforms needed. As he tells me, Timor's membership is just the beginning. For Monocle, I'm Naomi Shu Elegant.
And you can read Naomi's interview with Timor-Leste's President José Ramos Horta on our website. That's at monocle.com. Just listening to that, we still have Adam Hancock, who's joining us on the line from Kuala Lumpur. Thanks for sticking around, Adam. That push and pull that Timor-Leste now brings to the ASEAN table, that the fact that as the poorest member of the bloc, it will need support, but it does have this incredibly loud and brave voice in terms of civil liberties.
Absolutely, yeah. It's. I saw it described earlier as kind of a breath of fresh air joining ASEAN. It certainly lifted this meeting, I would say. They signed the declaration announcing that they were the next permanent member at the opening ceremony. And there was a real atmosphere in the media centre. You could actually hear the cheering coming from the main hall when they were introduced, and the speeches afterwards. They were very charismatic, and it was quite joyous. In all honesty, I think it's a good thing for ASEAN. It shows that the bloc still has the capability to attract members. It really now has all bases covered across Southeast Asia, representing huge amounts of people in this up and coming part of the world. And yeah, I think overall it's positive for ASEAN. There's another voice at the table, and they will certainly be a dynamic member.
Adam Hancock in Kuala Lumpur, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. It's 7:14 here in London, 4:14 a.m. in Buenos Aires. Well, this weekend has seen Argentinians deliver a loud vote of approval to President Javier Milei in the country's legislative elections. 2 years ago, President Milei was elected on the promise of cutting spending, lowering inflation and starting what he called a new era of peace and prosperity. Well, the US President Donald Trump has also been a steady background presence throughout with his financial and political backing for President Milei. Antonio Sampaio is an expert on Latin American politics and security. I'm delighted to say he joins me in the studio. Good morning,
Good
Antonio.
morning.
Well, this is a surprise because I think in the run-up to this, everybody was assuming that Milei's party would get a drubbing, and the absolute opposite has happened.
Yes, it was a big surprise, and Milei's party won 40% of the vote, which is much higher than estimated, than expected. And especially because in Buenos Aires province, where we had, and we covered this here in Monocle, back on the 7th of September, a smaller vote in which Milei's party got a complete defeat. And in this election, they managed to win in Buenos Aires province against the Kirchnerista, the left-wing Peronist opposition that has its bastion in Buenos Aires province. So analysts and the media in Argentina are still a bit flabbergasted by that and still trying to understand. But it seems that the fear of returning to the old days of the left-wing Kirchnerista government and the economic instability and high inflation that were very much present in the minds of Argentina, that fear really won out against understandably a lot of unpopular measures that Milei has done to keep the inflation down.
Let's talk about this because he's brought inflation down from 26% to 2%, which is huge.
Yeah.
That said, the social cost, pensioners losing their money, teachers losing out, so state workers being made redundant or losing their jobs in their droves. And that has been an absolutely punishing few years for large sections of Argentinian society.
Yeah, unemployment has gone up. Poverty has gone up somewhat, even though, reducing inflation is a very, pro-poor measure, But at the same time, many people prefer to have a job with inflation than not having a job and low inflation. And manufacturing activity has also been slowing down because of so many cuts. And social spending, many measures, to support people with disabilities and support for poor people have been cut. And this electoral victory for Milei is very important because it means that he has vetoed some of the pro-poor expenditure measures that the Congress has approved. But some of these vetoes have been overturned. And now with this victory, it means that he almost certainly will have the power to restore the vetoes or to not allow Congress to veto him.
We'll also have a very strong message of stability being sent out to the rest of the world because investors have regained confidence in Argentina. I'm thinking about the state oil firm has huge partnerships now with international oil and gas companies. So are we looking at a time when Argentina will be financially stable in the rest of the world's eyes now?
I think we're still a bit far. We still have some work to do, and Milei has a lot of work to do. He has 2 more years left in his current mandate for president, and a lot can happen still. And many of the analysis that I have been reading from Argentina mentioned that Milei has to interpret this victory with humility because it wasn't exactly a pro-Milei vote. It was also an anti-Peronista vote. And we should note that participation was very low, was 68%, which is the lowest participation in a national vote since the return to democracy.
Very briefly, what's Argentina going to look like in 2 years when they go to the polls again?
It will greatly depend on how heavy his austerity measures hit Argentines and how he can manage the fiscal challenge that he has, the repayment of debts that Argentina has. If a lot more austerity measures are put in place and his labor reform will be evaluated on that, he has still quite a lot of work to do for the next election.
Antonio Sampaio, thank you so much for joining me in the studio. Still to come on today's programme.
Suprema nella Chiesa è l'amore. Nessuno è chiamato a comandare, tutti sono chiamati a servire.
That's yesterday's sermon from St. Peter's. Pope Leo is embarking on his first overseas trip. That message there was the role of the church's love. We'll find out how successful he will be at spreading that message when he heads to Lebanon in a little while.
Craft is a matter of perspective, a unique outlook, an obsessive attention to detail. With UBS's Chief Investment Office House View, we're focused on identifying the latest investment opportunities and market risks to help you achieve your financial goals, so you get the big picture broken down into thought-provoking insights. Delivered daily and curated by over 200 globally connected, locally active analysts. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Let's continue now with today's newspapers. Joining me is Yossi Meckelberg, Senior Consulting Fellow at the Middle East North Africa Programme at Chatham House here in London. A very good morning to you, Yossi.
Good morning.
Now, you're wearing, we're wearing padded clothes, everybody, because it's cold, but you're looking incredibly smart. A day of professional engagement.
Yeah, some meeting with visitors from the region.
Excellent.
And of course, seeing you this morning.
I was hoping you'd say that. Thank you. I'm touched. Right. Good to see you. What have you spotted in the papers?
So first, it's the issue of, if we can start with Gaza, and in The Guardian talk about Turkey likely to be excluded from Gaza stabilization force because Israel objected, and Secretary of State Marco Rubio said, only if Israel is comfortable with any of the members of the ISF, the International Stabilization Force. And it makes me think it's about kind of the way that the Israeli government thinks. They see only risk, not opportunities. So there are tension between Israel and Turkey. It goes to 2010 in the Marmara incident. But at the same time, Turkey might play also a positive because it has more influence on Hamas. And without Turkey's influence and Qatar and Egypt, probably there will not be the ceasefire. Hamas won't agree to the terms. So the idea is when it's really urgent to have this stabilization force because we see how fragile is the ceasefire, this wrangling about who is going to be part of it and who's comfortable. With one more point about it, no one thinks what Palestinians are comfortable with. So it's one-sided, and any agreement should have both sides feel comfortable.
This is one of the great problems of what happens after the war, because in the run-up to the ceasefire being agreed, it was an enormously important moment for Turkey because it helped to broker the ceasefire with Hamas. It worked with Hamas. We saw President Erdogan doing a Middle Eastern tour last week. But am I right in thinking that Turkey is one of those nations which has gone to the ICC and has accused Israel of genocide? It is not going to be a comfortable relationship, is it? But it is one of those things which is arguably a necessary one.
After a war like this, nothing is comfortable, not for everyone. It's about looking ahead, looking into the future, how to get out of this situation. We can't change. The last 2 years have been, and we talked about it so many times, horrific. But now, when there is a ceasefire and ensuring that it's stable and all sides are on board, and we even see there are around 100 Palestinians have been killed since the ceasefire was called. They're still looking for some of the dead hostages to return them. It's still very fragile, but at the same time, if this can be also a turning point, as long as everyone behaves, including Turkey, because some of the things that Erdogan says are not very comfortable to build diplomatic cordial relations with Israel, but if they reduce the rhetoric and move into something practical, maybe there is an opportunity there.
Let's move on to an article in the New York Times about Donald Trump doing the, very much dominating the ASEAN meeting this weekend, which is what we covered a little bit earlier in the programme. But there's an article in the New York Times which actually stresses the profoundly destabilising effect that Donald Trump is having globally.
Yeah, I like one sentence in this. A lot of it is a great article, but one that caught my eyes was said, Mr. Trump's handling of global affairs is that it will be an unpredictable mix of instinct, grievance, and ego. And I think this sums up what we see. On the one hand, you see some achievements. The ceasefire in Gaza and the return of the hostages. It's an achievement. What he calls the 8, maybe 9 wars. I lost count how many he came to. Of course, it didn't solve these wars, but managed to improve the situation there. The fact that Europe pays more into spending on defense, it's some sort of an achievement. But at the same time, it's so erratic. If I'll ask someone, on which side is Trump in Ukraine? Is it with Putin or Zelensky? It depends which morning we see each other to talk about it.
Depends who the last person he spoke to.
Probably. When he sent an armada to the Caribbean, and probably try to topple Maduro in Venezuela, when there is an air carrier that apparently sank 10 boats claiming that carrying drugs and killing 43 people, probably against the role of the law of the sea and international law. So there's so much impulse there. So sometimes it brings to some achievement, but something is so erratic that it's very difficult to follow the direction.
Now, I don't often criticise the New York Times because I think it's an absolutely outstanding publication. What I really wanted at the end of this, which was effectively a very good and thorough list of everything that Donald Trump has done in the last 9 months to make everybody lose their footing, either for good or bad reasons. What you really wanted at the end of it was this is what the world should do to try to adapt to this. And it is that's the problem, isn't it? It's people have been left wondering what to do next. I mean, if you were Mark Carney and you're sitting there thinking, everything got stopped on Friday because of an advert from Ontario with Ronald Reagan in it, and now more tariffs are being heaped on. There's no book, is there? There's no rule book.
So because you're always wrong-footed by what is going, and because Trump is so thin-skinned and he could get upset about an ad in Canada and slap 10%. At this rate, if every ad that upsets him will increase tariff by 10%, by the end of the week will be probably 70% extra tariffs. But this is part of the adaptation there. Is to know, to expect the unexpected, not to be reactive to him. Because we know in a matter of few days he might cool down. So there will be 100% tariff one day, and then he decides, to remove them altogether or decrease them. So it's like sitting a bit with him in the trenches, waiting for the attack. Let him release all his steam, but think rationally while you deal with someone that at best is semi-rational.
Indeed, and makes Chatham House a very busy place, I would imagine. Let's talk about Ireland's president-elect. She was elected this week, Catherine Connolly. A huge victory for her. I think it was 63%. And she did very, very well in terms of Ireland's left-leaning opposition parties decided to stand behind her.
Yeah, it's because the government in Ireland is kind of centre-right, the fact that the president, we know it's more kind of a symbolic role in Ireland, but she's very opinionated. She has very strong opinions, for instance, on of more investment, more on defense, on NATO, the expansion of NATO, very strong opinions about Gaza and Israel. She has a very interesting background coming from a 14 children family, working class, making her way through politics. Then the Labour was not left enough for her, left it, became independent. So I think she will challenge the government. She will present something. I think also there is a tradition now, if you all remember the great, Mary Robinson being president and then leading in the UN the portfolio of human rights. So I think it's in this tradition of Ireland. I think it's interesting because there are going to be clashes with the government and probably with some other foreign dignitaries coming and visiting Ireland.
And finally, there's a great article in the Daily Telegraph today about how if you get on an aircraft nowadays, there is the possibility that you might get something to eat or drink, as Western carriers have realised that if you make everybody cross and pay for their coffee, no one likes you.
I waited for this article because I need like half an hour to talk about all my grievances.
We have a little time. We can devote the rest of the globalists
airlines
to your
that you
grievances.
feel luckily they actually fly you anywhere, let alone provide you any service. They take your carry-on, even there is a lot of space in the overhead because they want you to pay more expensive tickets, let alone you have to pay for coffee in the morning and everything. And I think they start realizing, according to the Daily Telegraph, that, even if you increase by a few pounds the ticket and you serve people with coffee, you won't be that upset. Or the need to pay for your seat. You'll get a seat at the end. But, as in a recent case, I was not even allowed to sit next to my wife because we didn't buy the ticket at the same time. So we were separate for 3 hours, which we survived. But all this idea that makes you actually think, do I really want to fly these airlines? When you have, for instance, if you fly some of the airlines to the Gulf and you get all this great service for no extra cost, you think, why can't we have in European airlines or in the United States?
The Telegraph, which is the absolute preserver of the English middle classes, is actually really it's out to get its teeth out for British Airways, actually, because an associated article, it says, is EasyJet now better than BA? And it says yes. So we have this idea, isn't it, that I love the observation that you make, that you're made to feel grateful to actually be allowed on the plane.
Yeah, because I think what EasyJet did in Ryanair, it was race to the bottom. Instead of saying, okay, those are want really no frill, cheap flight, forget about any service, fine, but the others will. So what happens? Everyone charge you a lot and give you zero service, which is not a great idea of any service or in the economy.
Thank you, Yossi. And if you are a carrier, next time you see Mr. and Mrs. Meckelberg arrive at check-in, let them sit together, please. Thank you so much, Yossi, for joining me in the studio. The time here in London is 7:31. You're listening to The Globalist. Now here's a look at some of the other stories we're keeping an eye on today. Another US warship has sailed into waters close to the Venezuelan coast. It's added to a growing US presence in the region. Washington says it's engaged in a war against drug traffickers, but Venezuela's Attorney General has strongly rejected the idea. The Jamaican government's ordered mandatory evacuation for parts of the capital, Kingston, as Hurricane Melissa approaches the Caribbean island. The storm's expected to make landfall in the next 24 hours. 2 people are still being held in connection with the theft of France's crown jewels from the Louvre Museum in Paris last weekend. One of the suspects was arrested at Charles de Gaulle Airport as he was about to leave the country. And the airspace above Vilnius Airport has been closed for a 4th time in a week after helium balloons were spotted carrying what's believed to be contraband cigarettes from Belarus. Lithuania has blamed the Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko, a close ally of the Russian President Vladimir Putin, for not stopping the practice. This is The Globalist. Stay tuned. It's 16:32 in Tokyo, 8:32 a.m. in Zurich now. Japan is entering a pivotal week in defence policy. The defence minister has announced the end of long-standing limits on arms exports. And President Donald Trump arrives in Tokyo a little later for his first meeting with the Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi. She's making changes a week into the job on the defence policy. Spending, regional security and Japan's shifting military posture are set to dominate talks with Mr. Trump, marking a clear step away from Japan's post-war pacifist stance. I'm joined now by Julian Ryle, the Daily Telegraph's correspondent in Japan. Good afternoon, Julian.
Good evening. How are you?
So there's a big change, isn't there? And just looking at how Bloomberg is covering this morning, it says that Japan is seeking to become an international arms powerhouse. That is such a change.
I think that's perhaps over-egging the pudding slightly. Yes, Japan is relaxing some of these guidelines that have been in place since the 1960s that have very much restricted the weapon systems that Japan can sell overseas. But to suggest they're going to become a powerhouse might be, as I say, pushing it a little bit too far. Japan does very much niche products in this sector. And they've always produced for the domestic market. So it's what the Japan Self-Defense Forces has required. And that will not always mesh with what international customers are looking for in arms systems. Having said that, Japan is doing quite a lot in the last few months and years to sort of try to reach out to potential new customers. I think it was in August of this year that they signed a deal with the Australian Navy to produce the next generation of warships for the Australians that are based on the Mogami class of frigate here.
Now, abolishing the current restrictions on the arms exports, I mean, you've just spoken about, talking to other countries about what they can and cannot export. But if you abolish the current tight restrictions on the arms export, what will Japanese defence companies now be able to do that they couldn't before?
Well, up until now, the rules have been essentially that Japan could export to other countries non-lethal weapons. So these are things like body armour, helmets, first aid equipment, tents and so on. And Japan has been quite generous with that in terms of providing to the Ukraine, for example, and other places. I think a lot of anti-landmine equipment has gone that way. Now they are looking for bigger ticket items. As I say, there's this frigate deal with Australia, and notably also Japan has signed a three-way deal with the UK and Italy to produce a next generation fighter. And that's quite a big deal for Japan, because in the past Japan has always relied very heavily on the US to get its hardware. Now it's turning that around, and it's working on providing its technology into a product that it hopes will be sold internationally. I think the Saudis are particularly interested in buying these aircraft when they're ready.
What is the reaction to this, or what do we imagine the reaction is going to be to these profound shifts, which are happening very, very quickly since Takaichi she's barely sort of got her name on the door. But these are massive changes really at top speed. How is this going to shock Japan?
I think Japan has been sort of almost mentally prepared for this for quite a while. It was actually first sort of put forward about 15 years ago under a liberal government, not this conservative administration that we see today. It was suggested that it might be time to give up on these guidelines. Nothing actually came of it at the time, but I think the public has been sort of almost conditioned to this happening sooner or later. A lot of people, Japanese you talk to, they say, okay, this is an economic opportunity, a chance for Japan to sell its technology overseas. But at the same time, they want Japan to return to being a normal country. And those are the terms, those are the words they use, a normal country. 80 years after the end of the war, they want the restrictions that were imposed upon Japan at that point to finally be lifted, because this all goes back to Japan's peace constitution, which has so much limited what they can do militarily.
There is a deeper consequence to this, though. I mean, wanting to become a normal country would mean that Japan has to abandon its pacifist principles, which will be very difficult to abandon.
I think there are absolutely, as you say, there's a large portion of the population here which would be reluctant to do so. But at the same time, Japan has just got behind a very conservative government and an even more conservative smaller parties that are even more committed to spending more on defence. Japan's in a very dangerous part of the world. The Chinese are very aggressive in the South China Sea and in around Taiwan and close to Japanese islands off the south. North Korea is nuclear armed and completely unpredictable. And we had a missile launch last week. And Russia as well. That's on Japan's northern borders. There were 3 nuclear-capable bombers carrying out operations or carrying out drills off northern Japan last week. So clearly, attitudes are changing here because they have to.
Very briefly, we have Donald Trump meeting the new Prime Minister. What do we think is going to be on the agenda?
It's absolutely going to be security issues. Japan is desperate for Mr. Trump to reassure his commitment to the security alliance. Takaichi-san lost no time at all in announcing last week, just days after she was announced as Prime Minister, that she would be very quickly ramping up Japan's defense spending to 2% of GDP from 1%, and that's 2 years ahead of schedule. Previous administrations have said that's not possible. She's just gone and done it. And this is very much as a sop to Mr. Trump to say Japan is a good and reliable partner in the area. Please do not leave us out of your security considerations.
Julian Ryle in Tokyo, thank you so much for joining us on Monocle Radio. 8:39 in Zurich, which is where we head next, because next month Pope Leo will embark on his first international trip. The Pope's destination is the Middle East, first visiting Turkey and then Lebanon. Well, Juliet Linley is former Vatican correspondent and also a regular voice around the microphones at Dufourstrasse 90 in Zurich, which from where we join her now. Good morning, Juliet. Good to have you with us.
Hello, Emma. Good to be back on air with you.
Well, let's talk about Pope Leo. Why has he chosen Turkey and Lebanon?
Let's take Turkey first. He's going to be there from the 27th to the 30th of November, and this is mainly to promote Christian unity. So he's going to make a pilgrimage to Iznik, which was ancient Nicaea, and he's going to mark the 1700th anniversary of the First Council of Nicaea. Now, we're not going to get bogged down in too many historical details, but that was a worldwide gathering in the 4th century, and it brought together sort of 300 Christian bishops convened by Emperor Constantine, and he was the first Roman emperor to convert to Christianity. And basically, the Nicaea Council marked a new era linking church and state for Christianity. This was a trip that Pope Francis had wanted to make. It was on his bucket list, and he really wanted to do it, but ill health in the end scuppered those plans. And soon after Leo took over the papacy, he said that he was going to be willing to go, and now we've had confirmation from the Vatican press office. So that answers your question of why Turkey. Why Lebanon? Well, we don't have a lot of details of what the itinerary will be when he goes to Lebanon from November 30th until the 2nd of December. But it's, of course, a peace-promoting trip, and he's also going to want to shine the spotlight on the plight of Christians. So it'll combine sort of support for suffering communities in this very volatile region and also a bit of theological diplomacy, sending a message of hope. Leo has also made it clear that he's expected to commemorate the victims of the Beirut explosion. That was 5 years ago already, and that killed, as we know, several hundred people, causing billions of dollars in damage. And he will be the third pope to visit Lebanon, Emma. Benedict traveled there in 2012, and John Paul II was there in 1997, and he was the first pope to go to Lebanon.
Is it just peace, or what do we think that Leo is trying to say more generally with this, as choosing these two countries as opposed to any other country on earth?
Well, I mean, if you look at any pope's first international trip, it does send a clear message of what he wants to prioritize in the course of his pontificate. And certainly bringing a message of peace is what Pope Leo has indicated he wants to do with his pontificate ever since he first took over the papacy in May. And the first words he said was, "Peace be with you." So certainly Lebanon, of all countries, is going to be very powerful because also, as you know, Emma, it has a very important, politically important political system that is distinguished by its religion-based power-sharing arrangement. Without wanting to go into too many details, but John Paul II was the one who said Lebanon is more than a country. It's a message. And if you look at it, you know, the president of Lebanon is always a Maronite Christian. The prime minister is always a Sunni Muslim. And then the speaker is always a Shia Muslim. And apart from this troika, the parliament's seats are equally divided between Muslims and Christians. So that would explain part of it, certainly, Emma.
He follows in the footsteps of Pope Francis, who didn't shy away from controversy when it came to this part of the world. I mean, not only just keeping in contact with Christians in Gaza throughout the war between Israel and Hamas was one thing, but also Pope Francis was not afraid of speaking out against Turkey when it came to the questions of the Armenian, what he described as a genocide. So does Leo have a little bit of smoothing over to do here?
Well, certainly compared to his rather more divisive predecessor, Leo is being seen as a bridge builder. He's certainly going to leverage, I am sure, the fact that he has an American passport. Remember, he has two. He also has a Peruvian passport. So that sort of counterbalances it. But certainly, let's look at it this way. He has a big role to play, and he's fluent in so many languages, and he's also an Anglophone. You can't underestimate in international diplomacy the importance of speaking good English. Let's face it. And this is a man who does that. And he is a man who has mixed race background. He's got migrant roots. He can speak to so many different players on the scene, on the international stage. He can speak to so many different ethnic groups. He can speak to different countries and different communities. And a lot of hopes are being placed on the fact that he is an American, and right at this moment, with Trump having brokered the ceasefire in Gaza, he's brought home the Israeli hostages. Don't underestimate that at the moment, an American in the region is probably being seen more positively than Pope Francis would have seen, who was very outspoken. He often criticized harshly the Israelis. He was, of course, calling for humanitarian laws to be respected, as does Leo. But certainly this is a good moment for Leo to be heading to that region.
Juliet Lindley at Dufourstrasse 90, thank you so much for joining us on The Globalist. You're listening to Monocle Radio.
IQ, EQ, and AI. 3 components key to the craft of innovation at UBS. Because to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving age, you need a partner with decades of experience, endless passion for the work, and a finger on the pulse of leading technologies, bridging human expertise with artificial intelligence, all to elevate you. UBS. Banking is our craft.
Time now for a check-in with our Balkans correspondent, Guy Delorney, who joins us on the line from Ljubljana. A very good morning to you, Guy. How's it looking where you are today?
Morning, Emma. Morning, everybody. It's looking a bit grey, to be honest with you, but later on in the day I'm going up to Kranjska Gora, which is in the mountains in Slovenia, and checking out a very lush chalet there for a Monocle story, so it should be delightful.
Terrible day you have. You have my absolute sympathies. Enjoy yourself and do report for us. While you're reporting, could you tell us what else is happening in your part of the world?
Now, did we discuss before, Emma, the very, very silly story about Albania appointing an AI minister? Not a minister for AI, but a minister who is an artificial intelligence. Have we discussed that before?
I think I might have remembered had we done, but just if you could explain rather briefly and as simply as you possibly could, please.
Indeed. So when Edi Rama, the ever jocular and gigantic Prime Minister of Albania, appointed his new cabinet a few weeks ago, he introduced a cabinet member called Diela, a mononym, as if they're a pop star or something. And he said, this is Diela. She is an artificial intelligence, and she is now a minister in my cabinet. She is the first artificial intelligence minister in the world, and she is going to ensure that all government procurement is absolutely free from corruption, because she is incorruptible and she has been programmed to spot corruption herself. Now, that, of course, raised all sorts of hackles in Albania, where you had the opposition saying, hang on a second, doesn't it say right here in the constitution that a government minister has to be a citizen of Albania, and how can they be a citizen of Albania if they don't actually exist? Anyway, publicity stunt, so on and so forth. Mr. Rama's back with a sequel. He's saying, get this, Emma, Diela is pregnant.
Excellent. So she'll be off on maternity leave, we're assuming, at some stage. But the more complicated thing behind this is that the use of AI actually as a kind of checks and balances system. I mean, how welcome is that?
Well, it's something where, if you're in a country like Albania, where corruption is well known to be a problem, and I think everybody acknowledges that, and there's a large anti-corruption prosecution which runs there and has been very successfully prosecuting lots of people, including allies of Mr. Rama. People are aware that something needs to be done about corruption, and if their country is to join the European Union as it wants to, it needs to get a handle on it. So what Mr. Rama is saying now is that when he says that Diela is pregnant, what he is saying that Diela will have 83 children, in other words, other AIs that will be working under her, and these 83 are for each of the members of his governing Socialist Party. So they will be in effect an assistant for all of these MPs. They'll be participating in parliamentary suggestions and keeping a record of everything that happens. So in essence, all of this is about accountability, supposedly, if this all works as Mr. Rama says it's going to work. It's going to be about accountability for these government officials, MPs of the governing party, and ultimately all of this procurement process in Albania. And we all know how much corruption is involved in procurement processes.
Let's move to Serbia, and it is running out of oil.
It certainly is. And the latest is that there's a tanker that arrived in Croatia a couple of weeks ago, which was meant to deliver one last load of oil for Serbia via the pipeline which runs from Croatia to Serbia, which is called JANAF. And apparently this delivery didn't make it. Now, this is a problem because Serbia's national oil company is called NIS. It is majority owned by Gazprom and Gazprom Neft, who are, of course, Russian, and they are under sanctions by the United States. And the United States have been holding off imposing sanctions on NIS itself. It kept on giving waiver after waiver, which went on for a period of months. But finally it said, we can waive no longer, and NIS is going to feel the full force of these sanctions. And that means that Croatia's JANAF pipeline can no longer transport any of Serbia's oil orders through to Serbia. And this is a real problem for Serbia because it's landlocked. It's got no other way of receiving crude oil deliveries. NIS runs the country's only refinery, and it provides more than 80% of the country's petrol and diesel, plus almost all of the jet fuel. So this is going to have big ramifications if Serbia doesn't sort something out. And it thought it had worked something out with Hungary, but then there was a fire at a refinery in Hungary last week, suspiciously enough.
We have but 30 seconds to talk about this. What are Serbia's options?
Serbia's options are, possible nationalisation of NIS. That's not going to go down well with Russia. Other options are that it finds some other way of securing fuel products from other countries. And it thought it had found this route via Hungary's national oil company, MOL. But as I just mentioned there was a fire at MOL's refinery last week on the Danube, which was exactly where they were hoping these replacement products were going to come from. So it's looking grim at the moment.
Guy Delorney in Ljubljana, thank you so much for joining us on the line to bring us up to date with everything that's happening in the Balkans. We head now to Helsinki and the city's annual book fair, which has grown into the largest literary event in the Nordics. It brings together not only authors and readers, but also publishers and cultural influencers from around the world. Well, this year's edition of the event attracted nearly 100,000 visitors. Among them our Helsinki correspondent Petri Bertsov. Petri went to the fair and met the programme director Vili Blofeld. Let's have a listen.
We have been the biggest book event in general in the Nordics. We get some 100,000 people attending every year. And I think from that maybe comes the special flair that Helsinki Book Fair has in comparison to other book fairs, is that we are for the broad audience, for the broad public. So this is not an event for the book industry just within themselves or just professionals working in the industry. This is for the readers. And it has been that for 25 years. And I think that is maybe the element that has made it grow to be the biggest in the Nordics.
And that 100,000 visitors, if you consider that, there are 5 million Finns, that's a really large number. And you really, just looking around, you see people from all walks of life. There's a lot of kids, there's a lot of children's programming, and it's not an event only for the so-called literary elite. Finns read a lot, and book lovers come here and they buy books as well. And yeah, it just feels distinctly egalitarian. I think people often, when they hear the word book fair, they think of these very philosophical, highbrow events. But how do you achieve this? How do you engage the general audience like the Helsinki Book Fair does?
Well, we also have the high end. That's part of the mix, but from the beginning it has been so that since this has been aimed to the broad audience, it means that we need to find all different kinds of audiences. And it means that we don't consider one genre of literature, for example, to be higher than some others. We try to cater to all types of readers, not only in terms of age, but also in genres. And so, for example, one big new thing this year is that on Sunday we have a big new slot of programming that is specialized on feel-good literature. So we try to understand what types of new kind of groups of readers or book enthusiasts there are and cater to all those audiences.
Let's talk about the programming. I think that's also one thing that makes Helsinki Book Fair, as a visitor, for me personally, very interesting, that you go really beyond the books. I mean, you have hundreds of events here, and it's not only with authors. You have scholars, artists, politicians, and much more giving talks. And the talks are not only about, I mean, obviously, if you're an author and you have a new book, you have to be here basically and talk about it. But there is so much more, and there's, you could spend a whole day here just listening to the talks. Why did you want to have all those talks feature in your program?
The Helsinki Book Fair is a forum for societal discussion, for sure. For example, this year we have all the living Finnish presidents are in different talks here. 2 of them are also authors of this year with their own books. But I think that also tells that the politicians see this as a forum where they want to be present in and take part at discussions here. I like to think that also tells of the kind of power of the book still. Books still are kind of outlets or ways to communicate or draw attention to societal questions and have discussions around societal questions around a book. I don't think that they exclude each other, or you need to think that, if they have a societal panel, then that's not about books. Where are the author discussions? They feed each other.
And then I think a wonderful thing is also that Finns really come here to buy books. I don't think I've ever left this fair without a tote bag full of books, and there's really nice offers as well, and all the publishers are here. How important is this event for the publishers in terms of sales and visibility?
Very important. I saw you came with your nice Monocle tote bag. So we have 100,000 people attending, and the median amount of books that they buy is 4.5 books each. So that means that during these 4 days we sell 500,000 printed books here at the fair. So for the publishers and for the bookshops, this is one of the most important kind of peaks in their sales calendar, is the Helsinki Book Fair. And when you consider all the challenges that business has in general or outside the fairs, it just becomes more and more important for them that there is this kind of window of 4 days when people really are here to buy as well.
And Finns are sort of known to be very avid book readers. We have an amazing national library network. The smallest of municipalities have well-stocked libraries, and Finns read a lot in schools as well. But does this sort of the reputation that Finns are avid book readers, does this still hold true? And if it does, why do you think that is?
It does. Of course, there are the same challenges here that happen or trends that happen in other countries as well. So there are groups of people in all age groups that kind of drift away from reading printed books. But then there are, audio books or digital books. And I think the thing that is happening is that reading books as a hobby is polarizing. But that means that there is the other side of the polarization that still is enthusiastic about the hobby and printed books and reading. And, we're standing here in the lobby of the book fair and people are just pouring in, the 100,000 people. So I think this is a testament of that.
Finally, a surprise question. I just came to think about this now. It's a local event and most of the books are in Finnish or Swedish, Finland's two languages. But I think more and more I've been coming here pretty much all my adult life, and I think the event is much more international than it was maybe 10 or 20 years ago. And I think Finnish literature as well is more international. Names like Max Seken or Paitim Stadovci, translated into many languages and many more names as well. But maybe just talk about that a little bit, how the event has changed and how international it is.
And I think it goes both ways. So Finnish authors get their works translated and kind of become international more and more. And then also, like this year, for example, we have some 40 international author stars here on the stages. And one trend that is happening in the Finnish book sales also is that Finns buy more and more and read more and more in English, for example, or in the original language. So not only international literature that is translated into Finnish, but in the original language. And so with all these trends, yes, the book fair becomes more international as well.
Ville Blofeld there, Programme Director of the Helsinki Book Fair, talking to Monocle's Petri Bertsov. And that's all the time we have for today's programme. The warmest of thanks to all my guests and to the producers Carlotta Rebello, Anita Riotta and Ryuma Takahashi. Our researcher was Joanna Moser and our studio manager was Christy O'Grady, with editing assistance by Mariella Bevan. After the headlines, more music on the way. The briefing's live at midday here in London. Hope you can join me for that if you can. And The Globalist is back at the same time tomorrow. But for now, from me, Emma Nelson, goodbye. Thank you for listening. Have a great week.
With UBS, you have a truly global partner, incorporating new technologies, innovative approaches, and unexpected opportunities, leading you to insights that help answer the questions that matter, delivered with passion, care, and unmatched expertise. Because it's about rising with the dawn each day, knowing that we can do even better. That's what banking is to us. Not just work, but a craft. UBS. Advice is our craft.